Welcome to another episode. Today I'm joined by Barry, who all of us know as like the co-founder of Skip, but now the Skip team has been acquired by the Interchain Foundation, and they're now a subsidiary called Interchain Inc. So welcome, and also like congratulations on the acquisition.
Thanks, Arjun. Glad to be here. Been a big fan of you and the show and all your writing for a long time, so it's kind of an honor.
Thanks a lot. For this episode, my goal is just to get like a quick sense of what's been going on in the Cosmos ecosystem and like what is the current state of the ecosystem, right? Like I feel like everyone in Interop is kind of plugged into what's going on in the EVM ecosystem, in the Solana ecosystem, but none of us, or like not a lot of us, know the inner circle gossip of like the Cosmos ecosystem, right? Like
Yes.
That's where you come in.
Yes.
So yeah, that would be my goal, and I would love to start at the acquisition bit, right? Because I think that would say a lot about where the ecosystem is right now. So tell us more about the news, like what inspired the acquisition, and how did you guys come to this decision?
Yeah, I can go over it pretty quickly, but there's a lot of like history and sort of context on how we got to where we are that might be interesting for people to get into. But I think, if you wind the clock back to 2020 and 2021, I think Cosmos was really, really hot. It had taken a lot of really differentiated bets on developer sovereignty, a multi-chain future, standardization around interop, and like all of these ideas are ideas that like everybody has parroted or copied or come to independently, except for like a small handful of actors, right? There's like, Solana, and there's like Sui and Aptos, but like the vast majority of developers in crypto and investors in crypto have started to realize like, okay, this is what you need. You need standardized interop. You need the ability to kind of build your own thing on your own terms. And you need to be able to do that while still kind of retaining some community cohesion and usefulness of a core protocol. And Cosmos had all of these ideas. The Cosmos Hub today doesn't do anything yet, but if you go back and you read the original Cosmos white paper, it was very clear. It was like the Cosmos Hub is going to be a real hub, an entry point to the ecosystem. It's going to connect the ecosystem and everything in it to everything outside of it. It's going to have a DEX. It's going to like do these basic things. So like a little bit like sort of how the superchain is thinking about things, or how like the Ethereum ecosystem is thinking about Ethereum, or now Celestia is sort of adding bridging. It's like sort of very similar to all these things. And it was like 4 or 5 years ahead. And there's some slight differences, L1s, L2s, but like, you can use the SDK to build whatever. And that was always like a little bit of a backdrop to these core ideas of standardized interop, build your own thing, sort of usefulness and cohesion around a sort of core protocol. Then if you fast forward to last year, you don't know, I'll like leave the interpersonal stuff aside, but like the growth and the excitement around Cosmos hadn't really materialized into that much, sort of that much around the core Cosmos ecosystem. I think it's worth pointing out that like all of the individual pieces of the Cosmos technology, I think, have been super successful, right? The SDK is used in 100+ different live chains today, massively more than like, any of these newer, L2 frameworks or things like this, including in a ton of AVSs. So like over half of the people building on Eigenlayer, over half of the people building on Symbiotic are using the SDK. IBC is like a top 3 to top 5 bridge by volume, which is pretty incredible when you consider like how little liquidity there is in the Cosmos ecosystem right now. Like the velocity of that money movement is super, super high. The Comet like sort of remains the sort of gold standard of how do I do consensus. So the technology has been very successful, but the token price has been like down or sideways for years. And like I would say the general feeling in the community has not been really positive. Like there hasn't really been any leadership. And that's sort of like where we get to the core idea of the acquisition, is like to try to bring leadership into the ecosystem for a new generation of growth. So the Interchain Foundation is the foundation that was originally associated with Atom and the Cosmos Hub, and has been around since 2017 or something like that. But they mostly sort of function as a funding body, right? Sort of funding a bunch of different teams to work on the core technologies successfully. A lot of the engineers are great. And so you've had these individual technology successes, but no one has really been focused, one, on the Cosmos Hub and the token, or two, and even more importantly, like putting together all of these pieces, the consensus, the interop, the SDK, sort of a core protocol, and saying, hey, this collection of things, this is the developer platform we're going to work on. We're going to work on it in a unified way. This is the ecosystem that we're going to build around. And then let's really get a flywheel going. There hasn't been anyone doing that for years because of some stuff that's happened that if you want, we could talk about it. But really the acquisition of Skip is to say, the ICF said, hey, our old strategy of like just working on all this technology isn't working. We want to unify things. We want to treat it as a real developer platform. We want to bring back this idea of a core protocol at the center of it, the Cosmos Hub. And so it's hopefully a moment of new hope for the ecosystem of like, hey, we haven't had anybody trying to go get people to build Cosmos chains and like connect to the hub and do all these things in years. And even still, it's been pretty successful. So like, what could it be if we really have the same resources that, other ecosystems have?
Makes sense. So it's almost like you said, you guys, or the Cosmos ecosystem started out in 2017, built some of the best tech that we've seen in the industry till today, right? Like the Cosmos SDK is still used to build so many new chains. I think like even the Bera chain has some sort of like Cosmos inspiration there. IBC is considered the gold standard of bridging. But somewhere down the line, like there was an attitude of build and they will come, but that did not materialize, right? So where do you think like the ecosystem fell short? Was it this sort of attitude that things will just happen on their own? Or was it like something else?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, I'd say originally, I think the Cosmos ecosystem didn't have that attitude. And if you wind the clock back to 2021, there was a lot of really interesting stuff that was happening. And like, for example, one thing that might be interesting to your listeners is like, there was an idea to use the Cosmos Hub to scale Ethereum. Like there was a point in time where like one of the things they were working on was like sort of the first roll up hub. Like that was an idea they had back years ago. And there's a bunch of other really interesting projects. A very early like chain abstraction concept came out of there. It was all from this company, Tendermint Labs. It's also called All In Bits. And they were kind of the labs team and really, really pushing adoption and marketing and growth. And that's where a lot of the initial growth came from. And they got Terra. And then kind of Terra did excellently, right? Brought in a ton of developers. And everyone's like, oh my God, like Terra, we forget. Top 3 chain. Like top 3 token. Like Terra was the Ripple, not to curse Ripple, of 2022. And we actually started Skip at a Terra hackathon in Chicago. We were there for 4 weeks. So it was like my first time in crypto. And like, that's where we were building. And like, it was in this like, in a jump office. And like, there were 100 developers there who were there for a whole month, just like 100% in on Terra. And actually, while we were at that hackathon, Terra exploded. Like it was in the second week, and I had quit my job, and we were like, "Shit, we really have to win now. Like, I need this money to pay rent." So that was a super intense time. But that was actually the second blow up. The first one was more quiet, which was Tendermint Labs, also kind of like imploded because of a bunch of interpersonal things and issues. And people have basically been trying to like put the pieces back together for a long time. So you had basically the two most important things in the ecosystem explode right around the same time. And then money left, leadership left. There was no clear direction. There was this big like, vision and power vacuum. And everything since then has been various people with, some resources trying to make things happen, but not really able to like, unite. I think it's less of like the attitude of build it and they will come, and more like at the moment of like maximum momentum, the two most important things like detonated. And it's been hard to recover
like we forget about Terra, right? Like all of us kind of have written it off from our memories, but there's actually an alternate reality where Terra would have gone on to be like the most successful chain, and then the Cosmos vision would have actually materialized so much more quickly.
Yeah. We were so like, I actually think this is something that someone Paradigm once said to me, but like they were like, we're so close to like the counterfactual world where that did happen, and like Cosmos was the leading ecosystem, and like it had Terra and it had Celestia, and it like had all these things that were super ahead of their time. And like, Hyperliquid, you're seeing it, like they use parts of the Cosmos stack. It's like the same idea that Terra had of, we're going to be an app chain, we're going to be a platform, but we're going to have a thing at the center of it that's really going to drive users. So who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe Barachain or one of these will be the next one there.
I mean, I think even DYDX at one point switched to the
Yeah.
Cosmos app chain vision,
Yep.
right? So it just feels like it was almost there at so many different times, but it never materialized into like a whole crypto ecosystem movement.
Yeah. And it's like really, I mean, I think the simplest way to put it is it's really hard to build a successful crypto ecosystem. And it's like 10 times harder when you don't have anyone who, like a team at the middle of it, where that's their job. Like that's the thing they're focused on. And that's kind of now what Skip, now Interchain, has become with this acquisition. It's like, that's our job. It's kind of take the pieces. They're all great. Like, let's put them together and like, let's make a great ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. So I think all of these blow-ups happened, and then like liquidity left the ecosystem.
Yeah.
The vibes are down bad, right? Like nobody is building, nobody is making money. Atom is not going up anymore. It's been down only for a long time. So it's like the community vibes you can feel as a shift, right? Like a lot of disagreements start happening, and I think that's what you were also referring to with like the inner fightings.
Yeah.
So as someone who's kind of devoted their company, their career to this one ecosystem, how does that like affect you guys mentally, and like when you're building, when you're trying to build like a successful company in crypto?
It's a great question. I think so. An important thing to understand about the Skip team is that we were really like born in fire of the second week of the company's existed, Terra exploded. And then we raised our seed round the week after FTX exploded. Like we were really in the shit. And like when that is like the birth of your team, and you're like looking at the team and you're like, are we doing, like, are we this, if we're going to turn back, like this is the moment to turn back, or how convicted are we in this thesis, like in these basic principles of build your own thing, standardize interop, and have, you know, a core protocol that we build around and plug into that connects all of it. If there was a moment where we were going to turn back, it was going to be like, you know, week 1, week 2. And, you know, we just have really believed in that vision for a long time. Oh, obviously there's moments where the team is down or things are difficult, right? But like, I think it is easy for us to keep going, knowing that like there's also been so much success despite these problems. Like 100 plus app chains, 10 of the top 100 tokens are Cosmos tokens. A lot of the projects that people are most excited about are either app chains like Hyperliquid or based on the Cosmos stack like Celestia. And so it's like, there's obviously a there. Like there's obviously something really good. And I think there's an element of just like really deep philosophical alignment. Like for me personally, and I think for a lot of people who are in Cosmos, they sort of like fundamentally reject this idea that everyone should build on one platform, like sort of the Solana idea. I mean, we love that team and that ecosystem, but rather than kind of trying to go and get everybody on our platform, what we want to do is kind of support the kind of meta decentralization of crypto, where there can be a ton of different people building different things in totally unrelated ways, and the whole industry can be more resilient because of that. And like our challenge now is, okay, we still believe in those things, but we really want to build the ecosystem that can be really highly connected and work together. So that's the balance.
When you're talking about all of these things, I cannot help but think about Ethereum, right? And the roll-up centric roadmap. Like the whole point is to allow more experimentation, which is happening right now. Yeah. But then maybe there's like too much experimentation and expansion that the vibes are kind of off, and it's kind of going through an identity crisis of itself, right? So do you see any parallels right now between what Ethereum is experiencing today to what you guys in the Cosmos ecosystem have felt for a long time, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, totally. Like there's a lot of parallels. I mean, the biggest one I think is that there has been a bit of a vacuum of what's the next thing in Ethereum, right? I mean, this is the meme everybody talks about it, like what's the North Star? I think about it a little bit differently, which is more like you need to be working backwards from a vision for the world. And if you are not doing that, then everybody is going to start working backwards from short-term personal gain. And obviously, they're all still going to do that, but it's how you balance those things. And in Cosmos, the vision that we work backwards from are these things that I talked about, right? Standardized interop. Everybody has the open source platform to build their own thing completely independently. And there's a protocol at the center of it that can coordinate things and bootstrap these chains and help them scale. And that's what the Cosmos Hub is going to become. But Ethereum, like, they said the vision of the world we're working backwards from is we're the world computer. And then, like, they said, everyone go build your own computers. And like, so like, if we wanted to be the world computer, like, why are we doing that? I think it's fine, to have a different vision or for it to be world. I think there's a ton of different ways to make things work. And I certainly have no idea how they should solve this problem. And I also don't know how much of a problem it really is. Like, ETH is fine. And like, people are using ETH and like people are building on it. So like, that's something. But like, I think when you don't have leadership, and Vitalik, I think to his credit, has been trying to step back. If you don't have centralized leadership, it can be really hard to get people to sort of focus on one of these core ideas. I think the Cosmos problem was historically a little worse because rather than just being like, well, here are these two things we could become, like, and that's a challenge, but you could work towards the community's big enough you can work towards both of them. Like in Ethereum, it's like it doesn't really have to pick between world computer and really good L1. It can do both things. Like this is feasible. Obviously, maybe it's better to do one, but in Cosmos, it was worse than that. It was like, well, actually, a lot of the leadership for a long time was saying, we don't care about the Cosmos Hub and we don't care about the Atom token at all. And like, that is the one thing you can't do in crypto. It's like, if you want to build an ecosystem and a developer community and user community, you can't be like, we don't care about the token. Like,
I mean, Vitalik has been tweeting about the ticker, so that's clearly
exactly.
not the Ethereum strategy.
Yes. So at least, they're not doing that. That's my one recommendation to anyone is like, you gotta care about the token because that's the thing that like unites people. That's how you have shared incentives. So Cosmos was worse.
But it's also like even in the Ethereum world, there's zones coming up, right? Like Optimism, Superchain, and then Arbitrum has their own thing. Polygon has Aglier, and they're all now trying to figure out interop, right? Whereas Cosmos has always had interop figured out, and with like Skip's tech coming in, there's a very good like onboarding process that can be achieved. Like there's a clear path towards it. So it almost feels like you guys are ahead in figuring out this onboarding problem, whereas all of the other EVM teams still have to figure out a lot of things. Like, is that how you also look at it right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's 100% right. There's some challenges and like, we can get into those, but at a high level, I guess our view of the world is everything sort of goes in this direction long-term of, rather than having a single blockchain or a community that's made up of a single blockchain, developers are always going to push for more independence, especially the best ones. Like they're going to want to capture platform-like economics. So, Ethereum was a few years behind Cosmos in seeing this. Now it's sort of, you're having this spread out and these clusters, and Solana's a few years behind Ethereum, but you're going to see it there too. You're going to always have people pushing for more independence. And so you have to like think about interop as step one instead of the last step. And I think in a bunch of ways, the Cosmos interop story is really, really far ahead. The most important ones are around trust minimization, expressivity, speed, and consistency. It's behind in some ways, which is like it doesn't actually work everywhere yet. We can get into that. But that's a really powerful base to build on. And I think it's really forced our team in particular to just like chew glass with how we're building, because the problem set is so much bigger as a result. Like we've got 100 different chains that we have to connect. They have 4 or 5 different VMs. There's not just IBC, but a bunch of bridges we have to interface with to get them in. And then we can't just go to the one chain that bridge connects to. We have to be able to go anywhere, right? And so how we think about the world and like the limitations that we run up into with, like, for example, some of these intent protocols and like whether they can scale at that level or not, I think is actually, maybe Cosmos like sort of looks smaller, but it's actually like much farther ahead in terms of scale that we have to deal with. And it's a little bit like, I don't know how familiar you are with like, Walmart or like, it's, there's this sort of famous story from the 90s, the 80s and 90s about sort of Walmart versus Kmart. And Kmart was another big discounter retailer in the US. And at the time, they were huge. They had like 96% of the market. Walmart was like 4% of the size of Kmart. Walmart was just in these like distant little rural areas. And Kmart was in all the big cities where everyone had all the money. And like everyone's like, Walmart's going to get crushed. Like they have absolutely no chance. But because they had to build out in these smaller communities where individual stores were doing less volume, they had to build out a really, really advanced, really different distribution network. And then when they did go into the cities, they were much more efficient. They were able to price things much lower, and they just crushed Kmart. Like Kmart is bankrupt now, and Walmart is has more revenue than any other company in the world. And
that's
so
almost like the perfect story.
Yes, yeah. That's really how I see us, and like how I see IBC, and how I see the story of Cosmos. Is like, yes, it's rural. It's rural right now. We don't have that much money, but we're coming up.
Honestly, it's not like far off to think about it, to be honest, because the tech has always been there, right? Like it's probably a distribution thing that needs to be figured out. Like we talked about, maybe if Terra worked out, we would not even be talking about this today. And if for example, you think about Optimism Superchain, like they kind of have distribution figured out for their like superchain vision, because they have a base building on top. They have like Kraken building on top, and like some bigger chains building on top. But because you guys have such like unique expansion challenges that you're figuring out the tech for, maybe like once you figured out the distribution challenge, like how to overcome it, it's going to accelerate differently. So as the new leadership coming in, is that your focus? Like just to figure out distribution and the liquidity problem?
Yeah, I mean, that is 100% the focus. Is okay, we have some of the best tech in the industry. Now, how can we actually help onboard a ton of more additional capital to it, and how do we onboard a ton new developers to it? Right? How do we put it together so that you can actually build things with the Cosmos stack that you can't build elsewhere? You just can't do it. And how do we use that to deliver experiences and products to users that are just better, right? And that has never really been the focus of the ecosystem, but it's a big part of what we bring. We're super, super end user focused. Like we work backwards from, okay, what is the experience of a user onboarding, or why is someone going to come in? What's the protocol that they're coming for? And we've got a lot of cool stuff that we're starting to work on there that I can't talk too much about, but like we're, Cosmos was created in an old meta, right? Where it was like, okay, you always want to build your own chain and like you should go do that. And now that meta is like sort of playing out elsewhere. And what we need to do is like skip to the next step of, okay, it's not good enough to have interop just within your ecosystem, right? Actually, what you need is connectivity everywhere. And this idea, a lot of people are calling it chain abstraction, but I think it's like simpler than that, honestly, which is like, we need to have a developer platform that people can use to interface with, aggregate over, connect to, and onboard users from all of these other ecosystems super, super seamlessly. And that's always sort of been the thing that Cosmos could have, which is this like really, really global connectivity focused platform. It's never really had it. And then if you do have that, right, what are the things that you can build that can't exist elsewhere? What are the products you can make that'll just be better than something on Solana or better than something on Ethereum? And we have all the pieces, actually, like, which is the really exciting part. And the big limitation has really mostly been around, obviously you need a home for some of this infrastructure, right? Where does it go? Cosmos Hub. And IBC has been very bad at scaling. And we can talk about why, but it's like it hasn't been able to compete or actually access any of these other places. Teams have spent years working on it. Like, why is that? I don't, we could get into it, but there's a whole new version coming that's going to completely change that.
Yeah, I think like anyone who's listening to this probably knows why IBC hasn't scaled to many more chains. But like what I am most interested in knowing about is like IBC V2, because I think I only saw a couple of posts. I think they were from you talking about like how the team is working on Eureka, which is the IBC V2 version, and how it's going to be like more extensible and we can connect more chains to that. So like what can you tell us about IBC V2?
Yeah. So maybe to start, sort of the core reason that IBC has more complexity, one of the core reasons that IBC has more complexity than other interop solutions is it is much more expressive. This is something that I think people outside of Cosmos who've only used other bridges don't really appreciate, which is other bridges kind of you just like, okay, I send a message or I query something, right? But with IBC, you have much more expressive notions of two-way communication, much more like TCP/IP. You have obviously message sends and contract calls and token sends and all these things, but you have acknowledgements and timeouts and callbacks, and you can build really complex, like truly decentralized multi-chain things. And without this, you can build fast onboarding like with intents and other things off chain, but without it, you can't really build legitimately multi-chain applications. You need this layer of really expressive communication that works more like HTTP, right? So that's like sort of how I think about IBCs. It's a bit more of like the top level developer facing primitives are much, much better than they are in other kinds of bridges that have simpler designs. So IBC has some inherent additional complexity, but you get a lot out of that, that you can build things with that you can't build otherwise. Like the internet wouldn't work if it was just like one-way communication. Maybe they'll send something back, but I have to rely on them to do that. So that's really exciting, and you need some complexity for that. The second bit of it is when people were building IBC, the original version was written by Chris Goes, who's now the guy behind Enoma and Heliax, and really actually like pushed a lot of the original intent stuff too. But nothing like IBC had existed. Like there was very little in the way of bridging at the time, and so they designed honestly a very complex protocol. It has a bunch of stuff in it that's designed to like prevent all of these obscure kinds of like potential attacks or like all of these things that like we've never seen, and a lot of complexity that's not necessary. And so it has this notion of connections and clients and channels and like you have to implement all of these things. Each of them is really, really complex. And then the way IBC was originally designed was, okay, I'm going to set up one side and I'm going to set up the other. And I'm just like send one message. And then like each of these components is going to have this insanely complex handshake process where it's going to like auto secure the other one. And like everything's going to be done, which is massively difficult to write in a smart contracting language. Just a ton that you can get wrong. And honestly, the only thing you get out of it is this bootstrapped setup where it's like, okay, I initiate one and then it's good to go. So what IBC V2 says is, okay, we want to keep all of this developer level expressivity so we can build apps that can't be built elsewhere. And we can have better communication. And then we're going to just strip out and massively simplify this underlying layer. And then we're going to have to do, a little bit of a setup process initially, but that's permissionless. Anyone can do that. And in exchange, we save like 95% of the complexity. So instead of having clients and channels and connections, we just have one underlying concept of a connection, which is like, of course, that's how it should be. It's like we have an interop protocol. It has a connection. Great. It's very simple. So that's the core idea, is stripping out these things that don't matter for security, but that save us a ton of lines of code written, a ton of complexity, a ton of potential bugs, so that you can now implement the IBC protocol with like very, very, efficient gas usage. I think our current benchmarks for V2, it's like cheaper than Layer 0, cheaper than Axelar, cheaper than Hyperlane, with better security, with like client security. So it's like...
So like that was my next question, right? Like, because for the last 2-3 years, because IBC was so complex, everyone was like working on making it more extensible to EVM chains. And then like, in a way, people got tired of waiting for IBC to be expanded. And then people were like, okay, we're going to build interop protocols that take the principles of IBC and then like take it over to the EVM land, connect those chains, right? But it sounds like with IBC V2, we can start thinking about IBC as like developers in the EVM world as well. You can use it as a interop protocol as you would a Layer 0 or like a Hyperlane.
Totally. You're going to be able to use it just like you can use anything else. We're going to expand everywhere in very short order, because we're starting with such a strong foundation. We're talking to different ecosystems about different multi-chain ecosystems about using that, internally as their interop protocol of choice. That's one thing that like IBC actually already has, right? Like it's internal to the Cosmos ecosystem. It's going to be internal to the Celeste ecosystem as well. Like it has a real chance of kind of being a neutral standard. And we want to work with as many interop teams as we can to like actually push that, right? As a permissionless standard that, doesn't have any one token associated with it, but can have many people's tokens who use it and interact with it. And like, layer 0, for example, has this notion of like a fee that can be turned on and built in, with every single endpoint. IBC doesn't have that. People who want to like set up systems for deploying it could add their own, right? If they want to, but like you can have this huge explosion. And yeah, I think that's the right way to think about it is before IBC was interop for Cosmos, and now IBC is just really expressive interop for anything.
Makes sense. I mean, it just feels like there were a lot of things that people had been waiting for from the Cosmos ecosystem, but now all of these could probably be accelerated, right? Like IBC could be used as a generalized protocol, and there's a leadership that can like really add fuel to the fire and actually accelerate the adoption. And there is existing distribution and buy-in into the tech. So it's actually pretty exciting. And after a very long time, I'm actually excited about Cosmos.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, we obviously are too. I like what we've been saying for such a long time is like, God, there's so much potential here, right? Like the different pieces of the tech, like you said, are there. We just need to connect them and like really make it useful for people to do what they want. Like this is, I think, a big mindset shift that people have to have, which is, okay, right now, the Cosmos hub is the hub for Cosmos, but with the technology that we have, like the Cosmos hub can really become a hub for all of crypto. Like that's the power of IBC. And it's going to be a mindset shift, but the way we're going to bring about that mindset shift is we're going to work on ourselves and with other teams, like real applications that take advantage of that and then really get this flywheel going. So there's a lot to be excited about. I think I'm glad you are. I hope you can convince the other Ethereum think boys to get excited too.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're here talking about it, right? Like, so that we can get the flywheel started. So the potential is there. And then what's the pitch for builders in 2025? Like, why should they consider building on Cosmos? And why is now the best time to do it? Like, take the stage and like close it for us.
Yeah. Well, one reason, so there's two reasons, right? There's two categories of builders that we really, really are going after. One is folks who want to be able to legitimately connect to everything, right? You don't want to be in Cosmos because you'll just talk to Cosmos chains. You don't want to be in Solana because you'll just interface with Solana protocols. You don't want to be on Base or Optimism because God knows when L2 interop is really going to start working. Like you want to be able to use, interface with, aggregate over protocols everywhere, right? And what we're going to be doing is building the premier multi-chain developer platform for those people. Like really the first cross ecosystem, completely neutral, super expressive platform where you're going to be able to build anything you can build as a smart contract, but now you can build it for all of crypto, right? And that's going to be totally new. Like Cosmos doesn't have this yet today. And like this, I think, is going to be the big thing where like I have a bunch of friends who are building on Base and they're like, there's really not that much liquidity here compared to Arbitrum, but I can't use any of it. Like, but I want the Base user. So this is going to be like the really big new push. And the second thing is the reason that, all of these chains are already building on Cosmos, which is like, you can build in Cosmos. If you want to build an app chain, you don't want to do that because you have something really specific that you need to build, or you want that L1 premium, or you want that ecosystem to be your own. It is, the most proven tech stack for doing that. There's a ton of liquidity for these chains. I mean, you look at all of the most successful projects of the last couple cycles and the things that people are most excited about, Barachain, Hyperliquid, Babylon, Celestia, like all of these things that are like new or that are coming soon, they're all app chains, all of them, and they're all L1s. They're not building on someone else's platform. They're doing their own thing. And the Cosmos stack, it's already the best way to do that, but we're going to make it much, much better. So I think if you want to build everywhere, you want to build the biggest thing, Cosmos kind of can be big enough to support both of those now. So.
Awesome. I think I personally resonate with that a lot. Like, I don't like the build on EVM or like build on Solana, build for crypto, right? Like, we're all here to connect everything. Like, we're not here to be in one ecosystem. So that's the perfect note to end on. And thanks a lot for educating me and anyone who's listening to it about what's going on in Cosmos. I hope a lot of those things come together and we can see a stronger, uh, ecosystem being born there.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on and to learn, Arjun. It's been super fun.
Thank you.